For this discussion, I reviewed Frank Lampert's article, Peddler in Divinity, George Whitefield and the Great Awakening. The article gave me a lot of different factors to consider when researching Whitefield and his influence in the colonies during the Great Awakening. These factors include his reach in terms of numbers, his reach in terms of the different cultures he was able to influence, as well as the different controversies that surrounded Whitefield and his ministry. Whitefield's reach was quite substantial. He was able to do itinerant preaching over the course of multiple visits to the colonies, each visit including multiple stops to multiple different cities, all up and down the Atlantic coast. However, his timing in history was very influential to his reach. The article discusses his relationship with Benjamin Franklin, who spread print media during the Great Awakening. Lampert writes, "No one was a more aggressive Whitefield promoter than Franklin. Though differing in religious views, Franklin and Whitefield enjoyed a lasting and profitable relationship that satisfied both men. The publisher sold more newspapers and books, and the evangelist reached a wider audience." The relationship between these two greatly impacted Whitefield's influence in terms of numbers. Though his itinerant preaching did reach thousands of people, his itinerant preaching probably would not have drawn the numbers that it did without Franklin's promotion work. It is worthy to note that Whitefield's influence in terms of reach was quite substantial, but his influence in terms of the cultures that he was able to shape is equally as impressive. There were not many groups up and down the colonies that you could find that weren't, at least in some way, shape, or form, impacted by Whitefield's messages. In Whitefield's messages, he had a Calvinistic approach to his evangelism. And within the Calvinistic idea, you have the idea that God is sovereign over all things. And while this brought tension in terms of salvation for a number of different people in the colonies during this time, the broader idea that God is sovereign over all aspects of life was something that most of the colonists were able to gravitate towards and agree upon. Puritans thought that God was sovereign over every single aspect of their life, including politics, the family, economics, business, whatever it was that they were involved in. God was sovereign over it. And if there was a way to turn that over to God and glorify Him, the Puritans wanted to do that. According to a historical analysis by Robert Russell, Puritans thought about economic, political, and social problems in extraordinarily corporate terms. The church consequently directed its attention not only to the problems of the individual before God, though that was an emphasis as well, but to the state before God. With this philosophy came a lot of critiques of the Anglican Church, even though Whitefield himself was an Anglican. This leads us to our third point, which is the controversy that surrounded Whitefield. Though humility is a biblical value that Whitefield talked about often and addressed with his messages on the sinful nature, even within the Anglican Church or the Church of England, a lot of people within that denomination thought that his critiques were too harsh or irrelevant, since everyone struggled with the sinful nature. However, the people in the colonies that were listening to Whitefield could not help but relate to the messages, as they all saw clearly the results of their own sin. There was one particular ex-Anglican who became a Presbyterian preacher in the colonies, who visited Whitefield due to his connection with his message. William Keeney wrote in his article on Whitefield about this particular visit, and he writes, "On the day after this visit, the revivalist publicly attacked the unchristian principles and practices of our clergy. Were I to convert papists, my business would be to show that they were misguided by their priests. And if I were to convince the Church of England Protestants, I must prove that the generality of their teachers do not preach the truth as it is in Jesus." And while the words of this particular Presbyterian minister would have been much, much harsher than what Whitefield was communicating in his messages about the sinful nature, a lot of people who gravitated towards Whitefield and identified with Whitefield found associations with Whitefield, even if their ideologies and their philosophies didn't match up perfectly. The controversy behind Whitefield is a lot about the association between him and people who gravitated towards his messages.